Kate.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the regular meeting of the San Rafael City Council for Monday, April 5th, 2021. I'll request the city clerk to call roll, please.
Vice Mayor Bushy. Present. Councilmember Hill.
Present.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Present.
Councilmember Yorenz Galati.
Present.
Mayor Kate.
Present. All five of us are present. I invite the Assistant City Attorney to report out on the closed session we just held.
Good evening, Mayor Kate and City Council members. There was no reportable action taken in closed session tonight.
Thank you. So with that, it's nice to see everyone. If you're tuning in from the public, you will see that we have two Zoom squares, at least for me, of staff. And we like to start our meetings this way because these are all the folks that are helping San Rafael to hum along so well. So please give a warm welcome. We have a new square on there to Jessica McLeod. She's our new Director of Digital Services and Open Government. Coming behind Rebecca Woodbury, we're delighted to have you here. She has incredible expertise in digital services, and to use her words that was in the press release was, quote, open government that works for everyone. And I think that's something that we all strive for, and we're delighted that you're here. So welcome, Director McLeod.
Thank you.
Since our last meeting in mid-March, in addition to having additional staff, we've reached some wonderful community milestones with our local vaccination numbers are well up over 55%. Businesses are opening up. I don't know if you went on to dine under the lights last week, but there were a lot of people out there, and we're now in the orange tier, and we definitely feel spring has sprung. Lots of wonderful things that have happened. But also since we last met, we've seen terrible acts of violence that have been committed against Asian and Pacific Islander Americans, against women. This is in addition to the violence we've seen against African Americans, Latinx, BIPOC, and Jewish communities over the past year. So all of us on this virtual dais, as well as city staff, we clearly denounce these acts of hatred and are committed to working with you, all of us, and our residents and our community partners to further our really important goals of racial and social equity. As Jean Chan, the founder of Asian American Alliance of Marin, recently said at a San Rafael rally, quote, any act of violence against a fellow human being is an act of violence against all of us. I thought that was incredibly profound, and it's something that I've been holding as we go forward and look at policies. Her words remind us of the need to connect our shared humanity so that we can together work to create a more inclusive city. And we have the right people. I can tell you right now, looking on the screen, we have the right people to do that. We welcome all of you in that effort. So with that, I will now turn it over to the city clerk, who will inform the public how they can participate this evening.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. And at this time, I'd like to ask staff to please turn your cameras off, and thank you so much. This meeting is being recorded and streamed live to YouTube, where viewers can provide comments in the live chat, or they're welcome to attend by telephone by calling at 669-900-9128. And the meeting ID is 817-3692-0337, or they can comment or watch directly through Zoom using the link on the agenda. If you're commenting over the telephone, please press *9 when Mayor Kate opens the public comment period. And once you hear a notification that the host is inviting you to speak, you'll press *6 to unmute yourself. If you're commenting through Zoom, you'll use the raise hand feature, and the host will let you know when you've been unmuted. If you're commenting through YouTube's live chat, please write public comment in caps, introduce yourself, and submit your comments in groupings. And please note that there is a character limit, so you will have to submit them in different groups. If you've submitted comments prior to the meeting by email or letter, they've been forwarded to the City Council, and they've been published currently to our website with the agenda. Closed captioning is available, and we posted the link in the YouTube live chat. Thank you.
Thank you, City Clerk. Are there any comments or raised hands from the public on any item that is not on tonight's agenda?
So once again, if you're participating through Zoom, use the raise hand feature. If you've called in, you'll need to press *9. And if you're on YouTube, go ahead and submit your comments now. I'm going to give everyone about 15 to 20 seconds to submit any comments through YouTube. I see no public comments.
Thank you, City Clerk. With that, I will turn it over to City Manager Schutz for the City Manager's report.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Kate and Council. I have a few updates and announcements, and I'm going to start with a brief COVID-19 update. The County of Marin recently reported that we're on track to have all adults vaccinated in Marin County by mid-May at the current pace of receiving the vaccinations. That's really good news. They were previously talking about having it by the end of June for all adults. So the pace has been strong, and it's moved to mid-May for the current pace for all adults. Marin remains firmly in tier 3 or the orange tier and are not yet meeting the yellow tier case rates. They'll be updated tomorrow, so we'll kind of see what's happening then. But for right now, our dropping case rates have leveled off, and the county health officer, Dr. Willis, is concerned about spring travel and people letting their guard down too early. He likened it to having a lead in the latter parts of a sporting event, but that if you don't keep up your strategies and effort, you find yourself quickly behind. So that's what he was telling people last week. The latest blueprint metrics, and again, they'll be updated tomorrow, but the ones on their website right now is we're at 3.1 adjusted cases per day per 100,000 residents. And that needs to come under 1 adjusted case per day per 100,000 residents in order to move to the yellow tier. And as you all know by now, we have to be in that tier then for a couple weeks, or meet the criteria for it for a couple weeks before we can move into it. So guessing perhaps about a month from now, if rates start declining further and more vaccinations take place, and maybe not as fast if we don't see the rates declining as quickly as we're hopeful that they will as more and more vaccinations take place. The state is working on new policies around a new tier, the 5th tier, which would be the green tier, which we've only been kind of wistfully talking about here at the city, is kind of wishing that there were a green tier in our future. And it looks like the guidance is now starting to formulate at the state level around what that might look like. Dr. Willis is expecting the guidance from the California Department of Public Health regarding that and post-vaccine behavior, and said that the county will circulate it as public health guidance as soon as it's available. I just checked a few minutes ago on the county vaccination site. It looks like we're now at 61% of the population, which is great, that have received at least 1 dose of the vaccine. So it's good every time you go back to that page, you can see the number grow a little bit more. Moving on to the American Rescue Plan, we have still not received the U.S. Treasury Department guidance regarding the various funding sources or pots of funds, including the funds earmarked for the city of San Rafael. So as you know, through the American Rescue Plan, there was specific stimulus funds for state and local governments, and then lots of other sort of entities as well, such as restaurants, small businesses, and others. And we have not yet seen the U.S. Treasury Department guidance on all of the rules and requirements around those. So our expectation is that we will receive those soon, and that now that we are in April, we're definitely in the beginning of our budget season for our new fiscal year 21-22 budget. So we expect we'll have all of those rules and requirements, and we'll be able to build those into your discussions around our annual city budget as we get into those discussions in your May and June city council meetings. Separate from the American Rescue Plan, though, which has already been approved and signed by the president, President Biden has also been discussing lately, and we've all read about it in the news, the infrastructure transportation funding plan, which he hopes will get passed by the summer. And there's multiple congressional committees working on the details of this plan. So last week, we submitted some examples of long-term infrastructure capital needs in San Rafael, such as the canal dredging project that has been many years in the making, to make sure that Congressmember Huffman's office and the various committees are aware of the extent of local needs. So there's no shortage of potential projects when you look at infrastructure and transportation in the Bay Area. And I know Transportation Authority of Marin has high on their list, Highway 37 improvements and US 101 580 connector and those sorts of things. So I think we'll be reading about projects like that as things that are deserving of funding, in addition to are more local needs, like I mentioned, dredging, and then we've street and bridge projects, pump stations, multi-use paths, and again, no shortage of things that fall into those categories. So that one will be playing out over the next probably weeks and months, I would imagine, as that goes through the process. So we'll keep an eye on that. Moving on, I wanted to thank you, Mayor Kate, for your introductory words denouncing acts of hatred that we see in our nation and our community, and also specifically reminding us that any act of hatred or violence against any group hurts all of us. It's a topic I know is always extremely important to the council, and also particularly timely right now because we are in the San Rafael Library's 21-day Race and Equity Challenge, which runs from March 31st to April 20th. And I just wanted to tell you a little bit about that. Today is day 6 of the 21-day challenge, but never fear if you haven't joined yet, there's still time to catch up. The San Rafael Public Library has also recently launched a Book to Action program for the community from the California Center for the Books to Read, Discuss, Act during the months of March through June. Our supervising librarian, Jill Harris, and librarians Bonnie Grushung and Margaret Stowawi have been leading the effort in San Rafael, along with support from many other library staff, including Director Andrade Wax and Assistant Director Bankhead. So you could read all about the Book to Action. I've asked the city clerk to put the link in the chat. It's srpubliclibrary.org and then /BTA for Book to Action 2021. One focus of the Book to Action programming is on the book, The Vanishing Half. There's been one, I think, book club discussion already on that topic, and there's another one coming up. And there's a number of online programs on this book and others. The library's immediately prior book club discussion was on the book Cast, The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson, which I think was first recommended to me by Councilmember Kurtz. Great recommendation. Both The Vanishing Half and Cast were both excellent. One a novel and one nonfiction, so something for everyone and all of your reading tastes. Back to the 21-day Race and Equity Challenge. The challenge is to read, watch, or listen to one thing about race and equity topics every day for 21 days. And the San Rafael Public Library is putting out the daily challenge on Facebook and Instagram and on their website. So every day has a reading recommendation and then a suggestion if you want to go deeper. So just as an example, day 2 was about stopping anti-Asian American and Pacific Islander hate. And there was a reading recommendation for safety tips for those witnessing or experiencing hate from the group Stop AAPI Hate. And a suggestion if you want to go deeper by listening to a podcast called Add to Cart, episode 18, Asian Hate and Gaslighting in Georgia. So these are just one example, day 2 of each of the 21 days, which again can be found at the srpubliclibrary.org or on their Facebook or Instagram pages. We've also been compiling an excellent resource page of electronic resources and book lists about anti-racism and equity. That's a little bit longer URL, so I'll just ask if that one could be put in the chat as well. Also, if you go to the srpubliclibrary.org, it's easy to find under e-resources. Lastly, on this topic, I know the City Council is looking forward to setting goals and objectives around these topics and response to hate and violence. And we have a goals workshop coming up later this month on the 30th. So that will be a great opportunity to continue this conversation and get a little bit more specific about what sort of actions the council would like to see in the next fiscal year on these topics. So we're looking forward to those conversations. One last quick item and advertisement for our next City Council meeting. One of the items that the City Council will receive a presentation on the relocation of the downtown Bettini Transit Center to create a new permanent transit center. So that will be a conversation at your next City Council meeting. This project was started, as all of you know, but just for the community that may not, as the SMART train began operations and the rail bisects the existing bus transit center and makes it a circulation challenge that the transit agencies feel is not optimal or sustainable for ongoing needs of transit riders. So the Golden Gate Bridge, Highway, and Transportation District is the property owner and the lead on the project and the lead on the environmental review. and they and city staff at your next meeting will provide an update on the project and where we're at in that environmental process and the next steps. So I just wanted to give some advance notification to the community that will be one of our main items at the April 19th meeting at 7 p.m. So thank you for the time for those updates, and I'll turn it back to you, Mayor Kate.
Thank you, City Manager Schutz. And for those watching, if you subscribe to his blog, it comes out twice a month. It's called The Snapshot. You can always know what's upcoming on our council meetings, as well as what was talked about at previous meetings. So I want to get as many people signed up for the Snapshot as possible. So thank you. Okay, next item on our agenda is a consent calendar. Is there anyone on the council who'd like an item to be held? Well, there's one item to be held. I guess not, because that would be silly. So I'll turn it over to the city manager to see if there is any public comment.
All right, if you're participating by telephone and you wish to provide public comment on the minutes, which is the only item on the consent calendar, then go ahead and please press *9. If you're participating on Zoom, use the raise hand feature. And then if you're on YouTube, go ahead and submit your comments in groups and introduce yourself. I'm gonna give everyone about 20 seconds. I see no public comment.
Okay, and I realize, see, this is a downside of not being all in person because I skipped an item. So we'll finish with this item and then we'll go back. Someone would have nudged me if we were sitting next to each other. But let's go ahead and I'll request a motion and a second on this, and then we'll go back and get the council member reports because we do want to hear what everyone's been up to. So is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
I can make a motion to approve.
Okay, moved by
I will
Kurtz.
second that motion.
Seconded by Hill. Roll call, please.
Vice Mayor Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Aye.
Councilmember Yorenz Galati.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips. I'm sorry, oh my gosh, Mayor Kate. Oh my goodness, please forgive me.
I would have nudged you back.
Sorry, please forgive me.
No, aye. That motion carries 5-0. I think there's a full moon. Not to worry. We're going to hang in there. We got this. Okay. So we shall go back to the council member reports. I will start with Vice Mayor Bushy.
Just a quick report on that. I attended a board meeting of the San Rafael Sanitation District along with Mayor Kate. It was a routine meeting and actually relatively short. I attended a new library committee continuing discussion about very exciting and very new plans for the conceptual configuration of our conceptual plan for the option of locating the new library along with the community center at the B Street site. It was actually a lot of fun being an old planning commission person to be out there on the site and looking at drawings. So anyway, we are progressing on that. That concludes my report.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. Well, building off of what Vice Mayor Bushy just said, she introduced me to General Manager Jason Dow of the Central Marin Sanitation Agency. I got a tour. I know that others have. I just want to make sure, just to report out to the public, I think this is a very well-run facility filled with great innovation and great management. I was very impressed. I would want to make sure folks know how smartly the innovations are, how smartly implemented they are, and we don't always see what they do every day, but it is really critical to our everyday lives that this agency exists. So I just want to call that out. The other thing to report is I did attend a Park and Recreation Commission meeting. I am the designated liaison back on March 18th. Met the commission, introduced ourselves, and I wanted to take a moment to let them know that I, of course, respect the authority of that body, and my presence was really there just to be more readily informed on what they're doing. Topics included the submission of the annual Dia de los Muertos event held on October 13th for consideration in the California Park and Recreation Society District 1 Community Service Award. That's a lot of words. They also considered the athletic field use policy, which is only applied right now to one field, and it's being considered to be applied on several other fields, as well as a report out on the Marin Bocce Federation 2020 annual report. The short is that obviously COVID had an impact. They did several things, including furloughs and fundraising, and they are looking forward to the turn of tide in 2021. I know that was somewhat of an expanded report, but I thought they were all good things. So that concludes mine.
Thank you, Councilmember Hill. Councilmember Kurtz.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. Following last council meeting's update on the age-friendly initiative, I raised my hand and I'm working with that group. And thanks to Director Andrade Wax for working with this initiative and seeing what's going to be moving forward. So we'll provide additional updates later. I believe Director Mark Brown will be coming to the April 19th council meeting to provide an update on Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority and WPA. There's a lot going on. And if you remember, I mean, this is a long-term initiative, and really it's only been active, formalized for a year. And so a lot of this year has been built around developing the organization foundation. But so much has happened, and it'll be really great for him to come and share the report, as well as what will be happening starting now with the funding that's already been received, thanks to the community's support and that work, as well as the communication plan. But if you hear of anyone in the community who has questions, I always like to ask people, do you know what MWPA stands for? And pretty much people say no. So that's work that needs to happen, but also we know that the community responds to their fire department and they know the value of their fire department. And so we're going to leverage that work. Attended the MCCMC Legislative Committee. There's so much happening right now in Sacramento. It's that time of the year. So there's a lot of new bills and consolidation of bills, but the themes around financing and restoring services following COVID, so federally and state funding supports, as well as homelessness and housing, are themes, and wildfires for California are themes around so many of these bills. So we'll be seeing more about that too. Attended the MCCMC Homeless Committee meeting, and with Mayor Cates leading that effort. So thank you. I do need to share that there's Project Home Key sessions. There's an initiative for Project Home Key 2.0. San Rafael and Corte Madera participated in Project Home Key 1.0, and now 2.0 is coming in. Again, these timelines are very fast, but there's going to be community listening sessions, and if City Manager Schutz could include these in a snapshot of the dates that will be available for the community to participate, that would be really helpful. And there's also information about Opening Doors Marin, which is another organization that's really identified to consolidate all the different agencies outside of the city and the county work, but consolidating all the different work and helping to herd all the information and players under one roof, sort of the Opening Doors Marin. So we'll be hearing more about that as well. And that's it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Yorenz Gulati.
Thank you, Mayor Kate, and good evening, everybody. I attended the MC Marine Clean Energy Board of Directors meeting, and a few highlights include a new budget. Their fiscal year ends on March 31st. They also talk about some of the targeted relief programs for their fair customers and also small businesses. So there is a little bit of support for everybody affected. They also give an update on EV charging stations. They are offering $3,000 in rebates and technical assistance. So hopefully they are looking for suggestions for new locations. So hopefully we can find a bunch of them in San Rafael. Also offering rebates for EV cars, and they are trying to figure out if there is a way to also start offering rebates for the used cars, but that's a work in progress. And finally, they do have, as Councilmember Kurtz mentioned with the legislation, they are supporting the SB 612 to advance local energy choice, and it's something that I have connected with the city manager, and we will be seeing if it's something that maybe the city of San Rafael also wants to endorse as well. So the website, if you want to get more information, is mcecleanenergy.org. So they always have great updates. I also attended the MCCMC Economic Recovery meeting. Mayor Kate is actually co-chairing this committee, and I will let her give the update, but it was very, very interesting. Always great to hear from other cities what they are doing for economic recovery, and presentations from Robert Eiler, and also our own Joanne Webster from the Chamber of Commerce, who co-chairs the Marine Chambers of Commerce for Marin County with the impact survey for businesses around COVID-19. And finally, I would just like to take a very quick few seconds to thank the county with Dr. Lisa Santora and Lorenzo Cordova, Canal Alliance, and especially our staff, our city manager, city clerk, Thomas, and the rest of the team for supporting the effort to host the first town hall in Spanish for the city of San Rafael. It was really well attended. The video has great information, and it has been watched for over 100 times. So I'm really happy to be able to bring important information around COVID-19 and rental assistance to as many people in our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Member. And as you said, we did participate in the MCCMC, which is the Marin County City Council and Mayors Committee. I might not have had all the letters accurate, but it's that group. And I think you gave a sufficient, a great recap of that. Councilmember Lorenz, Gladi, and I also attended the Canal Policy Working Group a couple weeks ago, when we got an update from the county on rental assistance for folks that are applying for that in San Rafael. In addition, I was happy to represent San Rafael, the Transportation Authority of Marin meeting. And there we talked about the MTC, so Metropolitan Transportation Commission. They have a safe and seamless mobility quick start program. Boy, this is just like the wordy recap we're all having tonight. Basically, it's putting forward from TAM both tier 1 and tier 2 projects that MTC will be considering. And we're not the only ones. All of the Bay Area is putting in projects. So we've put our tier 1 and tier 2 projects. We'll see which ones get funded. In addition, I attended the SMART, the Sonoma Marin Area Rapid Transit meeting. And you might have recalled that last year they had listening sessions, which were virtual, and they had them throughout the North Bay, hearing from both users and non-users of train, both people who love the train, people who are critical of the train, and we received input, or that they shared the information that they've received. More to come on that. It was very raw data, when there was a lot of it. So when I have more to report out that's more specific, I will for sure share it with this group and with our community. And then finally, participated in a meeting with Marin County Health and Human Services, and Mike McGuire around the homeless encampments. This continues to be a concern to our community. It's not okay for the unhoused to be under the viaduct, and I know that are not okay for them, and it's not okay for the rest of our community. We need to do better and get those folks connected to services and to housing. So an ongoing conversation of how we do that, recognizing, of course, that viaduct is Caltrans property. So San Rafael cannot unilaterally act in there, number one. And number two, any housing vouchers do come directly from the county as opposed to San Rafael. We don't have those. So working with the county. So a lot of conversation, and I'm hopeful that we'll continue or be able to offer housing opportunities to the folks there and get them the support and the housing that they should have. So with that, I think we've all reported out. Thank you for that. And I'm really grateful that we do take this time to do this, both from just information base, but also to remind the community that we are out there representing San Rafael in a lot of different places besides just in our San Rafael Council meeting. So thank you all for what you give back to the community. Okay, I think I have the agenda. The next item is a special presentation. I will ask Director Andrade Wax to come on so I can present to her. Hello there. And this is so timely. City Manager Schutz did a great job talking about the Race and Equity 21-Day Challenge. I mean, that to me is a progressive, forward-thinking aspect that we have of our library. So I'm delighted that it coincides with National Library Week, which is April 4th to the 10th. I have a proclamation. If you haven't heard one before, you get to hear some whereases in there. And let me get right to it. So National Library Week has been sponsored by the American Library Association since 1958 as a national observance of libraries across the country. California libraries of all types are trusted and treasured institutions striving to maintain collections and services as diverse as the populations they serve. And I am so glad that I'm having more librarians come on the screen, so keep showing up. Whereas, in times of changes and challenges for individuals, communities, and institutions adapting to COVID-19 emergency measures, libraries are leveraging technology to provide those they serve with digital resources and virtual activities to meet their educational and recreational needs, while also figuring out how to access physical materials as they've been restricted to curbside pickup and physical facilities are closed to the public. They've been very busy. The libraries have been very busy this past year. And finally, whereas libraries and librarians continue to raise awareness and develop strategies to address the digital divide through reliable access to computer equipment and the internet for people of all ages, abilities, racial identities, ethnicities, gender identities, sexual orientations, and other dimensions of identity, regardless of location, citizenship, income level, or educational background. Now, therefore, I, Kate Collin, Mayor of San Rafael, and along with my fellow council members, we hereby recognize the week of April 4th through 10th as National Library Week to be a time to honor libraries and library staff throughout San Rafael and for all the incredible work you have done and continue to do to bring our community together, well, virtually, but also eventually inside. So thank you for your important contribution and community service to the city of San Rafael. Thank you. And I will turn it over to the director to see if she has any words or anyone else.
Thank you, Mayor Kate and the City Council. We really appreciate it. It's my pleasure to announce two very important people that happen to be on this meeting as well. Jamie Cordes is our chair of our Library Board of Trustees, and Henry Bankhead is our Assistant Library and Recreation Director, also the city librarian. And to be very humble, I wish I could take this all on my own, but honestly, it's Henry and all of his staff who have done all the good and hard work to put on the programs and the activities that they have throughout the past decade or so. But also in this last year, it has been a real challenge, but they have met the need of the community and keep on going a little bit further. And for the Library Board of Trustees for their support and encouragement through this time, I just want to thank them as well.
Thank you. Henry or Jamie, do you want to say a quick few words? It's up to you.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Mayor Kate. Thank you, Jamie, for your work on the Library Board of Trustees. Thank you, Susan, for your leadership. Thank you, Mayor Kate, for your leadership. And I'd like to appreciate all the staff from the San Rafael libraries on their diligent work throughout the pandemic. And it looks like things are getting better.
Lovely. Jamie.
Sure. Thanks, Henry. Thanks, Susan. Thank you all for acknowledging and celebrating our library. As we know, the library is an essential virtual and in-person service and really a community hub. And to all these staff led by Henry who work so hard to make our libraries such welcoming spaces. And we know our libraries offer valuable services and resources. And as a city manager just went through a whole list of everything, the library is always focused on action and care and equity and partnership. And it's, as I said, very invaluable. But during this pandemic, we know that the library and staff have gone above and beyond to support many of our vulnerable neighbors. with expanding job responsibilities while also innovating to meet the needs of all of our library customers. So I'm really proud of them. I'm really happy to support them. And thank you for supporting our gems of the library gems.
Thank you, Jamie. Very well said. And it's nice to have a celebration like this as things do start to change. Hopefully we'll have patrons in our library soon. And until then, I know we'll continue to serve them from the curbside. So thank you all. What a nice thing to recognize this week. So with that, we'll keep moving along. So thank you all. We have one item on our public hearing on our annual progress report on housing. And I will turn it over to Director Jensen and Assistant Director Judici.
Yeah, I will just start. Allie, do you want, Allie's going to be handling this.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I actually am going to go ahead and introduce somebody else that will be handling the agenda item. I want to introduce Renee Nickenig. Renee joined us in March of 2020, and within a couple of weeks, she was thrown into this remote work environment, and she stepped up to the challenge. She figured out ways to stay connected and sought out challenging projects and really became a very important member of our department, and I'm very pleased to have Renee provide this year's annual progress report to your City Council. So Renee.
Great, well, thank you, Allie. I'm also very excited to be here and to be working on projects like this. I do have a short presentation and I should confirm with Lindsay, I should share my screen with that. Unless Lindsay or Thomas, I should be allowing you to do that.
Yes, please go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Apologize, we'll just take 1 second here.
No problem, Renee.
Okay, so the annual housing report. So this annual housing report, the reporting itself has happened every year for many years, but it's only been in the last couple of years that it has been reported to this level. Previous to 2018, so very recently, it was a much more summarized report and a brief report to the City Council, but now per state law, we have much more substantial information to share. So the table itself, the table that was shared with the two housing authorities, which is the, I'll say the State Department of Housing and Community Development and the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. It's a very substantial spreadsheet that I think had tables A through G in it, including a summary table and a table on LEAP reporting. Each table is unique and provides different information that all go into what really is the main number that we see here, which is our regional housing needs allocation progress and which we call our RENA numbers. So here you can see that for 2020, we had 82 units counted. Those units are very specific to having building permits issued. In those 82, you can see the breakdown on your screen here. 69 were above moderate income, 7 were low income, 2 were low income deed restricted, and we had 4 that were very low income. Within these numbers, we had a collection of different types. Most of them, and in the above moderate category specifically, were ADUs. We have an increase in general in those, it seems, in the last couple of years, which is really great for all of the new types of units that can be brought into the city. Those are above market rate. Our 2 notable projects within this, there were some below market rate, those low income. Those 4 of those were JADUs, which are junior accessory dwelling units that are providing another alternative source of housing, which is really great in the city. So these RENA numbers, they do seem low. This year, what we had this year, this 82 units does bring us up to just about half of our goal, which will end in 2023, which you can see at the bottom left of the screen, excuse me, bottom right of the screen there. So those RENA numbers do represent the units that were given building permits this year, but does not reflect accurately how many projects and how many units were approved this year, which is a much larger number. So we had a total of 201 units that were approved, including some notable projects that I'm sure that council is aware of and the public may be aware of as well. 190 Mill Street being a significant project there. Those are 32 what are considered extremely low income units. In the APR reporting table, they do get counted as very low, but we have made them aware and they're aware that those are extremely low units. So that will be particularly great when those receive a building permit and can apply towards our RENA numbers from next year. We also had a significant number of ADUs and JADUs, which is great to see in some other larger housing projects. With these approved units, these are units that have gone through the planning entitlement process, so they have not yet received, some of them have received building permits, particularly the ADUs and the JADUs and the single family dwellings, but some are still moving towards that phase. We are putting forth programs that will encourage those applicants to go through that entire process so that those projects can be constructed and can of course count towards our RENA numbers and generally help with our housing needs, particularly for low income and extremely low income. We also had a few key housing programs this year. Of course, this was a relatively unprecedented year for the type of housing that were needed. We've already talked about in this meeting some of the encampments we're seeing. Of course, that does directly relate to some housing needs that we're seeing in the city. But some notable housing policies that we had this year, the ADU and JADU ordinance, which was reviewed by the Planning Commission on March 23rd, is in its final stages of review and hopefully will be approved soon. The Fair Housing Program, which included a rent increase moratorium for the housing tracts in San Rafael, for the census tracts that were most hit by the COVID-19 crisis. There was piloted a buyout program for the housing development at Loch Lomond, which included being able to pay an in lieu fee that then partially funded the Homeward Bound to subsidize their funding for the 190 Mill Street project. So taking funding from that and applying it to a very low income, extremely low income units, as well as the low income units at 999 3rd Street. There's the relocation assistance program, also helped for opportunity zone census tracts for helping with low income housing there as well. Just making sure I'm having everything. So what we've talked about and including in these programs is also for the housing for extremely low income households. Some of these policies I've previously mentioned also related to the 190 Mill Street project, which included an approval for by right housing to make sure that that was approved. Efficient project review, that's something that I have been very much a part of this year and in the planning department, making sure that projects are going through as efficiently as possible, especially in our current remote working world. Among that included an online permitting system. We're now taking all applications online, which has been good feedback and is making the project review process go a little bit faster, considering we're not in the office, as well as the virtual public counter, which has included members of planning, building, public works, and fire to address the needs of the public without anybody having to be seen in person. And as well, the Inclusionary Houses Nexus study has been happening this year, partnering with the County of Marin to update the studies and the affordable housing in lieu project options. So 2 public comments were received that I was aware of, an email commenting on the diverse housing developments and opportunities in San Rafael, and as well as a letter received commenting on the RENA numbers and the work that there is still left to do to meet those goals that will conclude in 2023. 2023. So just to touch on that, we are working on programs that will facilitate applicants to go from the application process on the planning phase to get those building permits taken care of so that those projects can be constructed and we can have those units available and ready to use in San Rafael. So the recommendation is for the City Council to accept the report with as is or with any changes for reporting to the state and to the state.
Thank you, Renee. Very nice to meet you. And again, we can't wait till it's in person, and thank you for that virtual report. So let's start with questions before we open it up to the public. So Vice Mayor, maybe you can stop sharing your screen so I can see everyone would be great. There we go. Vice Mayor Bushy.
Thank you.
Yes. Do you have any questions?
I do not have any questions. It was a very thorough and complete report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Kurtz.
Yes, thank you for the report. I do have a question around the A dues and the J dues. So there's 42, and there is a mention that if it's under 500 square feet, then it could count towards the low. Mm-hmm. So am I assuming then they're all over 500 and they're counting for the above moderate?
In our case, we have, so all of the units, all the accessory units that were built, I should have probably specified ADU is for accessory dwelling unit, and the JADUs are junior accessory dwelling units, which in our case for our threshold is any unit, and especially for last year, any unit under 500 square feet was considered a JADU, which we consider low income. But yeah, it can be assumed that those that were not JADUs were above 500 square feet, either attached or detached to an existing residence or multi-unit property.
And so the question being, if we would just assume based on the size of it, it would fall into low. We don't go back later to find out.
No, we just assume under 500 square feet.
Okay. All right.
If I can add, just the assumption is because of the size of the unit, the potential for it becoming available at a lower rental rate is there. So that's why the state has allowed us to count those as affordable.
And because it's over the 500 square feet, that it immediately goes into above moderate, not moderate or low. We're just
market rate is basically what
it would just be considered market rate. Okay.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question. Councilmember Urens-Galati, do you have any questions?
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. My question was actually related to similar to Councilmember Kurtz. So what if you have like a really super cute luxury, junior ADU? Is there going to be a way to know if it's based on size or if it's based on, where it's located and what type of, luxuries doesn't,
No,
because it could be like a lot of different little houses.
Yeah. No, I think the value is that there's a potential for the smaller the unit is, there's a potential for the ability for that unit to be affordable to certain income groups, certain income levels, because of the nature of the size of the unit then results in a lower rental rate. And no, there's no way for us to check to make sure that they're going to be an affordable rate. It's just a matter of the way we are able to report out to RENA is that they allow us to count those as affordable units. But they're not deed restricted. There's no way to check to see what the rental rates are. It's simply for reporting purposes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hill.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Kate. Thank you, Renee, for this report. I found it very helpful. Your characterization that it's expanded. I thought it was great to have this amount of data. I would also, just for the sake of the public, if I could say so, I would say that the Community Development Department has really, in my opinion, done a great job in trying to explore every facet to make sure that we can get as close to not just our RENA number, but by the spirit of making sure that our community is well served to build and ensure that housing is affordable for all of our residents, both folks who are living here and who are yet to live here. I had two questions. I think this is going back to what I've heard in the past about assisted living apartment units not necessarily being counted. because they didn't have full kitchens is my recollection. I just want to get a sense of are we still looking to try to get any amendment to the criterion for that so that we can count those, or just want to get an update on that?
There isn't an update. Yes, we would like to get those counted. They are, in our minds, they do provide living, a type of living for seniors. So, ideally the state will eventually find a way to allow us to count those. But at this point they are not counted. Senior housing that do the 999 3rd Street, that project does count as units, but at this point we're still in this phase where we have housing, and because of the virtue of how that housing is provided and in that it provides support, the state is not allowing us to count them. I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Paul?
Yeah, I just want to note that we've been lobbying this for a number of years because the city has done actually a pretty good job with a lot of assisted living housing, and it's housing and we don't get credit for it. And we're not the only ones out there that have been seeking credit because like I said, this has been going on for a long time. I think what's going to happen is there's going to have to be some sort of draft legislation that is sponsored by an elected that will help push this through HCD and the governor. But, right now we've only had, we've lobbied and pushed hard, but we've really not gotten too far. So.
Okay, thank you for that update. And then my other question is around SB 35. I saw that 0 permits have been issued, and I was curious. I know in planning commission meetings there was to be development of standards in the event of an SB 35 permit being issued, so that we could at least provide some guidance as far as how those developments would be built. Just to spell it out, SB 35 would remove some ministerial control by city to developers, and I just wanted to see if that was still on track to be able to provide those prescriptions.
Yes, we are still working on that. We have hired a consultant to help us kind of organize the objective standards, and once that is done, we're really close. Once that's done, we'll bring it forward to the design review board and to allow them to weigh in, and then we'll bring it forward as we normally do to the planning commission and to your city council. But it's in the works. There's great progress that's been made, and it will be hoping to have it to your city council by the end of this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one comment, one question on the assisted living conversation. I mean, that's something that I'll try to figure out how San Rafael can take an active advocacy role in that. I know that back when the JDUs, before they were counted, there was a lot of advocacy by local government, and that actually did move the needle. And so that was something that Vice Mayor Bushy and I actually saw transpire. So I will reach out to other mayors in Marin County and see if we can keep moving that forward, especially as we know, and I know this is our progress report, but as we look at the RENA numbers that are coming down the pike, those are units, and that will really impact our bottom line. My question had to do with the slide, Renee, that you showed of the approved versus built. So it's about 200 units. This is the age-old conversation that we have. We approve, we do not build units ourselves. And kind of put you on the spot, but what are we sensing in terms of how many of those will ultimately be built? I mean, that was a big number.
That's a really great question. I mean, certainly in those numbers and the way that we're streamlining permits, and particularly one effort that we've done this year is that ADUs and JADUs don't need a separate planning permit anymore. We're going just through the building permit system. So those in particular do contribute to some of quite a few. One number that is not explicitly counted in the APR is the follow through. So the way that the spreadsheets are set up, there's not a clear way to follow through and see what projects have gone all the way through, but the ADUs and the JADUs do make up most of the buildings and single family dwellings sometimes too that were constructed this year. But the larger projects, I'll ask Paul and Allie to comment on.
Yeah.
So
you
the,
want to go a minute? Oh, okay. A couple of things. First of all, two of the projects that you saw on that list of approved projects, 190 Mill Street and the Vivillon Whistle Stop Eden Housing Project at 999 3rd Street. Both of those projects have actually come in for building related permits to start construction. So they're real, they're happening. As you know, we've given them some of our housing fund to make them happen. And so we expect that, they're gonna start up. We, interestingly, we have the project at 350 Marydale, which are the 45 townhome units. We have the applicant coming back wanting to modify their below market rate requirement. Not surprising, to reduce it from what was originally approved by 20%, because they have a buyer who's quite interested in building this project, but that's as far as we know. And Allie, I don't know if you can chime in on some of the other projects on that list.
So I think those were the ones I was going to chime in on. The other ones were, let's see, looking at 350, 104 Shaver. I think we had, we asked the applicant where they were in the in terms of submitting for building permit applications, and I think they're looking at selling that property. The other one was 1309 2nd Street. They have recently asked for a demo permit, so I expect that they will be submitting building permit applications soon. Something we've heard with that project is that they're waiting for our downtown. This project is in the downtown. They're waiting for the downtown precise plan to see what happens with that, because that will allow them to add another unit possibly to their project. And then the others are single family dwellings that I expect will probably get applications this year for building permits.
Thank you. So I know after the financial crisis, approvals were extended a year without having to come back through the city process. Has that happened at all with COVID? Has that come down from the state? Automatic approvals extended?
Yes. So we have there. Yes, that's come down from the state. There have been a couple of applications that have asked whether their project is extended. One of them is 1628 Fifth Avenue. They're basically getting an automatic extension. The other one is 703 3rd Street. I don't recall if there are others, Paul. I think maybe 104 Shaver would qualify under that category.
And I believe the state granted 18 months. Is that correct, Allie?
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
So it was that legislation during the Great Recession, yes.
Well, it made a big difference for Summerfell. We did have some projects that took advantage of it. So I wanted to see if that was the same situation. I mean, if people are interested, we want to give them the support they need. Okay. I don't see any other questions right now, but if any more questions come back after we go to the public, council members, be sure to write them down so you can get a chance to ask. So with that, I'll ask the city clerk. So I'll open the public comment and see if there's any of the public that would like to comment on this item.
Yeah, if you're calling in through Zoom, you'll need to press *9 and wait for the host to invite you to unmute and press *6. If you're watching through Zoom, use the raised hand feature. And if you're submitting your comments on YouTube, just a reminder to please write public comments in advance of your comments and introduce yourself, and then submit your comments in groups. We do have a speaker. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Bob Pandoli. I'm speaking for the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative. As usual, the staff report is well written, concise, and informative. The annual performance report shows that the city is making significant progress with winter protections, relocation assistance, 32 extremely low-income units at 190 Mill Street, and the purchase of 3301 Kerner Boulevard, among other accomplishments. But With 75% of the sixth housing element cycle completed, housing production is really lagging. For example, the city's made slightly less than 3% of its goal for very low income housing and 6% of the goal for moderate income housing. Overall, the city so far has met 32% of the housing production goals coming out of RENA. So some of the factors that cause these problems with production are really beyond the city's control. Early in the sixth cycle, the economy was not favorable at all, and there certainly aren't any easy sites around anymore. But too often the process is part of the problem. The steps you've taken in the past couple of months to streamline the process should help a lot. But here's our message. The Northgate Town Square application is an excellent opportunity to address badly needed housing at all income levels and to make progress on RENA obligations. Probably not much of an opportunity here at the end of the sixth cycle, but it's going to help a lot with the seventh cycle, and it's time to think about that. It's obviously a large project, and there's an almost automatic assumption that if a large project can be made smaller, potential impacts will be less. Too often the result is a loss of housing opportunity. We would urge you to express your desire to maintain the unit count through the completion of the draft EIR. Once that's done, you can understand the impacts, if any, from the housing count and make adjustments accordingly. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Bandoli. And thank you for your email ahead of time. Thank you.
You have another caller.
Okay.
Good evening. This is Bill Carney with Sustainable San Rafael. Sustainable San Rafael supports the points made in the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative letter. And we ask the city continue to apply its creativity to generating as much workforce housing as possible. In particular, by supporting the full amount of housing proposed at Northgate Town Square, by requiring that all of those units, well, the low and moderate units required by the city there, be actually built on site. This is a big enough project that it deserves some special consideration from the recently enacted changes to the inclusionary housing. And then finally, by working with the owner and developer towards to support that housing and the retail, working towards a signature town square open space in the center of that project to anchor the heart of this exciting new San Rafael neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carney.
Yeah, this is John Reynolds. I'm always concerned for people that are workforce people, but also for service workers. And we're trying to do as much as possible to provide affordable housing for very low income people and low income people. We don't yet have that solved, or moving in that direction with our plan for providing trust fund money and paying for units that might be developed, like at Whistle Stop or Mill Street or other places that are devoted to more low-income people. But we need to do more. I know this, you're reporting on what has been happening in 2020, but we need to move forward. I support what Bill Carney was saying about Northgate Mall having devoted to low-income folks. Working with the Housing Authority, I don't know what extent they can provide Section 8 housing to people in some of these places that are already moving forward. But that needs to be done as well it's really a concern for service workers as well as workforce housing people that they need to be living and functioning in this county, not to have to drive over the bridge and up from Richmond or North Bay or San Francisco to come to jobs here that they can be paid for. We still need to move in that direction as strong as possible, and make that a plan of action as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Reynolds.
We do have a comment submitted through YouTube. This is a public comment from Grace Garrity from RGM. How can a community group advocate to change state criteria to include assisted living facilities and RHNA goals? And that concludes public comment.
Thank you, City Clerk. So I will close the public comment and turn it over to staff in just a moment to answer the question about community group participation. I will say that the whole, I think back in 2018, the council at the time asked community development to look at how do we remove barriers so we can start to move the needle. So this, the previous council was pro-housing. This is a pro-housing council, really looking at how can we make policy changes to actually get the units. So, and we would be doing that even if it didn't have these high RHNA numbers. I will also ask the director to comment just on the proposed Northgate project, recognizing we're not talking about the merits. It is not on the agenda this evening. It is going through its own public process. So maybe you can speak to the public process so anyone watching can know how to participate at the appropriate time, because that is actually not on the agenda this evening. So with that, I will turn it over.
Certainly, and then whatever I miss, I'll turn over to Allie to see if she can fill in the gaps if I miss anything. We have actually received formal applications for development planning applications. It's not a pre-application, it's not a conceptual review for the Northgate Mall. So they include a rezoning of the property to planned development district. And that basically forces a master plan of the entire 43-acre mall site. And a design review permit application, a mapping application for dividing the property up into parcels. And there's also a development agreement application, which tells us that the mall will, or Merlone Geyer will want to vest their approvals for a set period of time because this project is phased over a 20-year period. The applications are required by state law to, once they're filed, we have 30 days to review them to determine whether or not the applications are complete. Most of the time, the first shot of application filing, the applications are not complete, but we're completing that review right now, and that review should be completed within the next week or two. Once the application is deemed complete, then we move on to the environmental review phase. This is a large project, so we'll be going through it. It is subject to environmental review, and then of course that has its own timeline and public review process. We expect that early in the process, before we start any hearings, we'll probably likely have a study session on the project, a joint study session with the Planning Commission and the Design Review Board. This is something that we've discussed with Merlone Geyer. And then at some point, likely this project, since it will most likely require an environmental impact report, another public meeting that will surface will be a scoping meeting with the Planning Commission to comment on what topic areas are to be covered in that EIR. And I expect that those public meetings will likely happen in the next 3 to 4 months. So, Allie, did you want to add anything to that? You're on mute.
You're mute.
Katie, when I do that. The only thing I would add is that if folks are interested in, engaging and being part of the public process, that we're going to be updating our website to include. Right now, the project is shown on our major projects website. We'll include something similar to what we did with Costco, where interested individuals can log on, put their name in, and we'll keep track of who those folks are. And so when hearings are underway, they will be notified of such hearings and will be provided opportunities to participate in that way. The other thing I would suggest is in the major projects website, there's also a link to the applicant's own website, so that I would recommend folks looking to get more information to access that as well.
Those are excellent reminders so people can stay informed and engaged as it goes through. This is very, very early in the process. So do either of you have an insight on how community groups could advocate? And I'm happy to talk to RGM, Responsible Growth Marin, offline as well, because I do think there can be a united voice, but would appreciate any insight that staff might have.
I would say in the same way, once we get that website updated to allow people to request notification in that method, you could also submit comments and provide input and support of the project if that's the interest of the community groups.
Right. So yes, absolutely. And in addition, for having senior living units be considered by the state as RENA units. So if we have any other, we'll figure out, we'll do some thinking on that, because I think there is a way to get community input that we can gather. Okay. Well, thank you. Yes, Councilmember Kurtz.
And also, would you suggest I could take that back to the MCCMC legislative group to review as the committee there, and see if there's actually any current legislation or bills that are currently moving through that have identified that as well. Or if you're aware of those, you could share those.
That'd be excellent.
I could try to follow up.
Yeah, thank you. Great idea. Great idea. That gets all the cities and towns talking about it. So thank you. Okay, with that, I will just call on the council members. So that's probably easier than having you raise your hand if you have any additional questions or input. So I'll start with Vice Mayor Bushy.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any input or any comments that you want to make before?
Just that we continue to do well, and we're continuing down this path, and I will be happy to support us. I guess we accept this report when the time is right.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Kurtz.
It's just another follow-on question about two projects, Northgate Walk, and if are they under this 18-month window still? Because it feels like we've been talking about them for a while. I just don't know where their clock is at this point. And then the Los Gamos project, and I saw that one's now incomplete. And I'm wondering if you have any additional information on that. Anyone?
Yeah, I'll start with Los Gamos. So they did submit an application. Their application, like you said, is deemed incomplete. They're collecting those additional items that we requested. Once those items have been submitted and we deem the application complete, the next step is to start the environmental review process. We have already retained somebody to prepare the environmental documents, so they've started reviewing the technical reports that have been submitted. So that's kind of the where it is right now. Once the application is deemed complete, I expect about 6 months or so before we see an environmental document, depending on whether it's an initial study or an environmental impact report. And then as far as the Northgate Walk, I was just looking at our website to see when that was approved. I believe it was, Paul, do you recall if it was in 2020 or 2019?
No, it was definitely 2019. And it's one of those projects, Councilmember Kurtz, I think we're going to have to check, because some of the approved projects that have been around longer may not benefit from that 18-month automatic extension. So that's something I think we're going to have to check. So, but we've heard nothing from the project sponsor on that project. So.
All right, because that would, I mean, we slotted 38 units for low, but if it's not going to materialize, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. Good questions. Any other comments, Councilmember Kurtz, before we go on? No. Okay. Thank you. Councilmember Gulati.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I love to hear that to see that the city is really interested to add more housing at all levels. I think ADUs and ADUs are a great way to add housing when it's hard to develop new land and new construction. So just a comment, and I think we discussed this before when we are thinking about very low and low income housing, just to look at the entire city and not concentrate the low income housing in one area, because that's really hard for the community and also for schools and a lot of different services. So, but I think we are keeping that in mind, and I just wanted to, remind everybody again that it's always great to have, the housing distributed around the city. So that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for the report.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. I have no additional questions. My only comments, I would repeat really what Councilmember Gulati just said around, any opportunity we have to have distributed and integrated housing. Obviously, let's try to do that. I think oftentimes if we were to just do what our state legislators would have, if we played it out, it would not necessarily lead to communities that are as diverse as I think we would like them to be. So I will be supporting the acceptance of this report. Thank you.
Thank you. And I share my colleagues' praise. Another great report and all the work that you do around the projects that come forward. And really, I think we have more JDUs and ADUs than any other city in Marin County, both because we're bigger, but I was hats off to the Community Development Department that you figured out how to make the permitting easier and really work with the applicants. So we are now actually seeing the benefit of that. So thank you. And we'll hope that the projects that are on the to be built list will come back through. And until then, I would request a motion to accept the report. That is the action.
I will move to request. Oh, am I supposed to read it?
You can just read the first line, the annual. Yeah.
Okay, annual report. So I move to approve the annual progress report on housing units submitted, approved and built in 2020.
Great.
An update on progress of implementation programs in the housing element.
We are so buttoned up. Perfect. Is there a second? Vice Mayor Bushy has seconded. A roll call, please, City Clerk.
Vice Mayor Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Hill.
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz.
Aye.
Councilmember Gulati.
Aye.
Mayor Kate.
Aye. The report is accepted 5-0. Thank you all. Thank you, Community Development. Although when I look at this, I think you might still be on the screen. The next item on our agenda is General Plan 2040, which has started, I think we started on it 2018, 2017. Mr. Miller can tell us, and a downtown precise plan. So I will turn it over to one of you two. Yes, to Director Jensen. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor Kate and council members and members of the public. Actually, I'm joined tonight by Barry Miller, our General Plan Project Manager, and also Bob Grandy, who is with Fair and Peers. There are transportation engineering consultants that have worked on our General Plan 2040 and our Downtown Precise Plan. We actually have a three-part presentation. This is the 6th and final progress report on the General Plan 2040. And I will start with some introductory comments and background, and then from that point, Barry Miller will report on the current status of the plan, the draft downtown plan, the draft DIR, the timeline, some of the key issues that have been raised during the public review process, and then next steps. And then lastly, Bob Grandy will provide an overview on the draft transportation impact assessment guidelines. And I do want to make a couple of comments on that topic. Briefly, one of the major tasks and elements of the General Plan 2040 update is the need to transition the way we analyze transportation impacts. Per the state law, our general plan is introducing a new method of transportation analysis, which is vehicle miles traveled, or commonly known as VMT, for environmental and CEQA review. And for some of you who have been around, you know that for the past 35 years, our traffic review has really been administered through the level of service grade system process that we've used to analyze impacts for environmental and CEQA review. And we can no longer use level of service for environmental review. However, we can continue to use it for planning and monitoring our intersections and also development review. Well, this topic of VMT is quite new. In fact, we had 3 informational reports we brought to the City Council in the last year and a half on this topic. It's complex, and it departs from our historic approach of assessing intersections and road operations. And because of its complexity, the City Council directed at our the last informational meeting we had on this last year that the General Plan 2040 program the preparation of user-friendly guidelines so that the general public and the user knows what to expect and what this all means in terms of VMT and whether or not a VMT analysis is required, et cetera. We had initially planned on not preparing these guidelines until after the general plan was adopted, but we found an opportunity to jumpstart this effort with Fair and Pierce, which we did. And so the draft guidelines are completed, and Bob Grandy will summarize those for you tonight. We are not asking that you approve or take action on these guidelines. This is an initial rollout draft for review. We are going to be looking for comments. In fact, we already received a very detailed letter from Responsible Growth Marin with some good suggestions, and we're going to be scheduling a meeting with them after the council meeting at some point to go through their comments. There's some good suggestions that are worthy of consideration in revising the guidelines. Lastly, I just want to note that as this is a progress report that's before you tonight, there's no formal action and except to accept the report. So Barry, can you move on to the next slide, and I'll just cover the next slide and then turn it over to you. Mayor Kate, you mentioned that we started this process some time ago. It was actually January 2018. Between January 2018 and fall of 2020, there was a lot of work done at the front end to prepare the draft General Plan 2040 and the Downtown Precise Plan with the work of our steering committee, our 24-person steering committee. And in the fall, we published the draft General Plan, and we provided the council briefing of the plan in October, which was the last progress report you received. Since then, we've had a number of Planning Commission hearings on the draft EIR and the draft Downtown Precise Plan. I would also like to note that the Planning Commission has already reviewed the draft EIR, which was released early this year. There was a Planning Commission meeting in March on the draft EIR. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Barry.
Great, thank you, Paul. And I'm just going to confirm everyone can see the screen. Okay.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
And I'll be walking you through the progress that we've made on 3 documents: the General Plan 2040, the Downtown Precise Plan, and the EIR. This is likely the last progress report we'll be delivering on the General Plan, since the next time you'll be seeing this, it will be following a recommendation from the Planning Commission to adopt the plan accompanied by resolutions. And again, just to recap, the purpose of the General Plan update was to move the time horizon of the plan forward from 2020 to 2040. The existing General Plan was adopted in 2004, and it had a horizon year of 2020, which is already behind us. This was also a chance to respond to new state laws regarding General Plan content and address new issues and conditions, updated population and employment forecasts, and recent plans and programs like the Climate Change Action Plan and the Bike and Ped Master Plan update. One of the important guiding principles for this entire process is that we're not starting from scratch. We're building on an excellent policy framework that was provided by General Plan 2020 and General Plan 2000 before that. A lot of the update process involved revisiting the policies and programs in the last general plan and evaluating how each policy or program might be strengthened or updated. Along the way, we added a number of policies and programs based on input from the steering committee and the community at large. One of the things that sets this plan apart from its predecessor is a greater focus on climate change and resilience issues and an emphasis on planning with an equity lens. The plan responds not only to new state requirements for environmental justice, but also to the broader goal of being a more inclusive and just city. General Plan 2040 also includes an updated land use map, policies that strongly encourage housing, and new policies on topics like sea level rise, wildfire prevention, historic preservation, and community services. The neighborhoods element, which was first added in 2004, is retained, and it's been completely updated based on feedback from each neighborhood in the city. The mobility element now focuses not only on congestion, but also on strategies to reduce vehicle miles traveled. In other words, the number of miles that our residents and workers have to travel each day in their cars. This is a really important part of the city's climate action strategy, and it supports the state's goals to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We've added a few elements to the plan in this process, but we've also consolidated a few elements, creating a document that will effectively guide the city for the next 20 years. This slide highlights some of the key issues that were raised during the 3 Planning Commission hearings that were held on General Plan 2040 in October, November, and December of last year. One is this issue of the use of the word should versus shall. This is a familiar issue to anyone who's been through a general plan update. Using words like encourage versus require when you frame a policy. And in response to public comment on this question, we'll be making a number of changes to either increase predictability or increase flexibility. I would say that in general, we want the plan to be more flexible. It has to last for 20 years, and we need to recognize that it is an aspirational document, but that regulatory language is appropriate in some cases, particularly in the programs where we want a clear mandate for an action that'll follow the adoption of the plan. We received a number of letters calling for specific tree preservation and tree protection standards, as well as letters calling for stronger language protecting wetlands. A number of edits will be made in response to these comments. We also received requests for specific text changes regarding the Northgate priority development area, and we'll be making most of these changes. A number of interesting comments relate to the long-term effects of the pandemic, particularly as they relate to the future of San Rafael's economy, its traffic patterns, and its retail and office markets. There were a number of comments expressing strong support for the arts and culture element of the general plan. We also gave the Planning Commission an opportunity for a deep dive into the plan at their meetings, and a key message that they provided was to look for ways to add metrics to the plan. In other words, how can we add measurable standards and outcomes to this document so we know how we're doing? The Commission also asked that we expand on the ways that equity can be incorporated into future city plans and programs, and that we establish a clearer economic vision for San Rafael that aligns with the city's equity goals. And I want to point out before moving on to the next slide that each comment received from the public and the Commission was cataloged and annotated into a matrix that includes direction on how we'll be responding through revisions to the plan. We can't incorporate every single change that's been requested, but we're doing our best to balance the input that we've received and make sure that the plan is responsive to everything we've heard. So I'm going to move on to the Downtown Precise Plan. And it's actually been nearly 30 years now since the 1993 Downtown Vision Plan was adopted as the guiding policy document for downtown San Rafael. In 2018, San Rafael received a grant from ABAG and MTC to update that plan and develop new downtown zoning regulations. Work on the downtown precise plan started in January 2019, and the general plan steering committee was tasked with being a sounding board for that process. A working draft was completed in May of last year, and that was further vetted with a general plan steering committee subcommittee with a public review draft completed and published on December 21st, 2020. The new plan for downtown includes a form-based code which replaces existing zoning regulations for downtown. And what the form-based code does is to integrate building design standards into zoning and establish regulations that are tailored to each part of downtown. So the Planning Commission held hearings on the downtown precise plan earlier this year, January 12th and 26th, and on February 9th, 2021. Some highlights of the downtown plan: it includes an updated design vision with plans for new public spaces, streetscape improvements, historic preservation, and housing and economic development initiatives. The plan relies on height limits to guide new development rather than using density or floor area ratio limits, and that's a big change. At the same time, it includes standards for building setbacks, recessed upper stories, and civic spaces, and detailed direction for the way each building relates to the street and sidewalk. So it's more prescriptive in some ways and more flexible in other ways. The plan includes an updated height map, increasing heights in a few locations and allowing for bonuses of 10 to 20 feet where affordable housing and other community benefits are provided. The grant for the project enabled the city to update downtown's historic resources inventory, which is something that had not been comprehensively done since 1978. Combined city staff, consultant, volunteer effort collected data for 572 properties in the downtown boundary on historic resources, and ultimately about 100 properties were identified as potential historic resources. This provided the basis for regulations in the form-based code that emphasize sensitivity to historic context, especially along 4th Street and B Street, where the largest concentration of resources exist. The plan also includes cross sections of streets, showing how streets can be adapted over time in downtown to be more pedestrian and bicycle friendly, as well as a strategy for producing more affordable housing and avoiding the displacement of existing affordable housing in downtown. In the course of the hearings, a number of issues were raised. We'll just highlight those quickly here. First, the findings of the historic resources inventory were reviewed carefully by San Rafael Heritage and by others in the community. There were a few cases, as you might expect, where reviewers didn't agree with the conclusions of the city's architectural historian on their ratings for individual properties. In some cases, the feedback was that the buildings weren't rated high enough. In other cases, it was that they were rated too high. We've been working closely with San Rafael Heritage and with property owners to address these issues. We've got a second architectural historian working on behalf of the EIR team for the project to evaluate each rating and provide guidance where there's an issue. A related issue are the standards for historic buildings, including special height limits on parcels adjacent to historic buildings. Again, we've been working with San Rafael Heritage and property owners to make sure that the standards in the plan achieve the right balance between historic preservation goals and economic development goals, which, by the way, are supportive of each other and not necessarily mutually exclusive. We've also received comments on some of the specific design improvements proposed by the plan, and most of those comments will be incorporated. There have also been comments on the proposed building heights. As you might expect, again, some suggest they're too high and others are suggesting they aren't high enough. Again, we're looking at these on a case-by-case basis. One interesting issue that we've encountered is the question of how density bonuses will be handled by the downtown precise plan. As the council is aware, we're required by state law to offer density bonuses for projects that include certain percentages of affordable units, but we are removing the density standard in the downtown plan area and the bonuses are being provided using height rather than increases in the number of units per acre. So we've looked at how this will work in practice by looking at a couple of other cities that have gone through the same process and dealt with the same question, and we're tailoring a solution that will work for San Rafael. Some of the other comments that have been raised are similar to those in the general plan, which are how will the city and downtown adapt beyond the pandemic, particularly what's the future of the retail and office markets. Just drilling down on the question of historic preservation, I wanted to highlight some of the supplemental outreach that we've done. There was some concern about how the plan would impact property owners whose buildings were deemed eligible as historic resources. We've done follow-up meetings with the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Business Improvement District, as well as direct outreach to property owners, including direct notification to each owner of a property that was identified as potentially eligible as a historic resource. In February, we sponsored 3 Zoom webinars for property owners to walk them through the downtown plan and discuss the standards for historic preservation and respond to questions and concerns. We also prepared a historic preservation context statement, which is an important part of the overall evaluation, and created a preservation webpage on the general plan website. As I mentioned earlier, we're having another consultant review the initial findings to provide a second opinion for several of the properties where there's some issue about whether or not a property may be historic or not. The last component I want to bring to your attention before I turn it over to Bob is the EIR, which covers both the general plan and the downtown precise plan. The process actually started in April 2019 with the scoping session before the Planning Commission. The EIR itself was published on January 7th of 2021 and was subject to a 61-day review period that ended on March 9th. And what the EIR does is it looks at the effect of adopting the general plan and the precise plan on all of the topic areas required under the California Environmental Quality Act, including aesthetics, biological resources, geology, and so on. It looks at alternatives to the project, which in this case included a higher growth scenario and a lower growth scenario. And on each topic area, the EIR evaluates the potential for impacts and lists mitigation measures for impacts that may be potentially significant. Since it's a policy plan and not a specific development project, mitigation usually means edits to a particular policy or program or adding new policies or programs to the general plan that will avoid certain impacts. At the end of the day, the EIR identified significant unavoidable impacts on air quality, cultural resources, greenhouse gas emissions, and transportation. And as a result, there will be a statement of overriding considerations included when the plan comes to the council for adoption. There were 14 written comments received on the EIR and 6 oral comments received at the public hearing on March 9th. Some of the issues that were raised are highlighted here. They echo some of the points on the earlier slides relating to historic preservation, natural resource protection, the need to acknowledge certain wildlife species that were not mentioned in the document, the density bonus calculations, consistency with the county congestion management program, mitigation measures for greenhouse gas impacts, and factual data on the San Rafael rock quarry. So I'll wrap up with this slide, which provides a summary of next steps. At this moment, we're revising the 3 documents that I've just reviewed. Our EIR consultants are managing the responses to the draft EIR comments, and we'll be producing the final EIR for staff review by the end of this month. The project team is completing its responses to comments on the general plan and the precise plan, including comments from the Planning Commission. And over the next month, we'll be preparing redline versions of both the draft general plan and the draft downtown precise plan showing the proposed changes. We'll be bringing those drafts back to the Planning Commission during May for final public hearings with the Commission, with the intent of returning to the City Council sometime in June with the draft general plan, downtown plan, and EIR ready for discussion and hopefully eventually adoption. We do anticipate one or more council hearings once we reach that point before you take action on the resolutions adopting the various documents. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Grandy. Before I do that, I do want to say that Paul and Bob and I will be here to answer your questions and comments at the end of the presentation. So we will come back to any comments that you may have on the general plan progress report following Bob's presentation. And hopefully Bob is out there.
Thank you, Barry. Next slide, please. So over the next 10 slides, I'm going to provide an overview of the guidelines that we've prepared for conducting transportation studies going forward. It's a 49-page document, and sort of broken it up into the four kind of main pieces, which are the bulk of the document talks about how to scope transportation studies and the methods to use in actually preparing the studies. There's also a section on thresholds, and then finally improvements and mitigation measures, which would be identified where a significant effect or impact is determined. In terms of the scope, we're really talking about, first of all, screening and determining whether a study is needed at all. And if the study is needed, then what's the scale? Is it smaller, larger? Generally, it's a reflection of the scale and complexity of the project, how big the transportation study needs to be. The methodology is really around the technical approach for how we would evaluate everything from VMT, the level of service, to transit, effects on transit and pedestrian and bicycle facilities, all modes. So that's the framework for the guidelines. Next slide, please. Wanted to give a little bit of context before we dive into the details of the scoping. As I think Paul mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, the guidelines were really largely prepared to reflect the change in CEQA guidelines that created the transition from level of service to VMT as the CEQA transportation significance criteria. But the guidelines also retain level of service as a multimodal assessment tool. And this is around consistency with the city's general plan. The current policies and the new policies have a level of service policy item. And so this level of service will be evaluated going forward in studies. This will not be a CEQA determination. It will be what we characterize as improvements, not mitigations, mitigations being a term specific to CEQA. And those improvements, if they are identified and accepted by the Planning Commission and the Council, would make their way into conditions of approval for projects. The guidelines also acknowledges that there will be anticipate that there will be future CEQA changes, and that future updates and guidance by the Governor's Office of Planning and Research are assumed to be incorporated in the document and carried forward into future studies. Next slide, please. Some additional context, the guidelines apply to a whole range of projects for the most part. I think the projects that would be coming to the council under these guidelines would be land use entitlements under city control, but it could also apply to land use activities by other agencies that are subject to city review. It could apply to transportation projects. So those are sort of the three main buckets. And then underneath those three main buckets, there are some provisions related to controversial projects and also projects called subsequent phase projects. Those are projects that may have an initial phase, but a later phase has either been delayed or not defined, and so need to be addressed with a study. One thing we wanted to highlight is each project is unique. While we've tried to cover a whole range of different ways in which projects could be evaluated, the guidelines aren't intended to be prescriptive. We know conditions change and there are unique projects out there that doesn't need to apply. Also, not all the criteria and analysis in the guidelines apply to every single project. That's where we get to the issue of scale and determining the scale of scope that needs to be identified. And so what's key to this is the consultation with city staff to confirm the level and type of analysis. Next slide. So now we'll talk a little bit about scope and kind of some key elements of scoping We've identified 3 different types of transportation studies. And as you walk down this slide from top to bottom, the studies get increasingly more complex, and the studies then would be linked to larger and more complex projects. So the simple form of evaluation that we done for projects is what we call a local traffic assessment. This is a familiar term that many agencies are using in the post-DMT era that applies to projects that are very small, where you would just do a site plan review and look at the issues around multimodal access to a site. So how do vehicles, pedestrians, cyclists access the site, and how does that work within the context of the immediately adjacent intersections? So that's what we would call a local traffic assessment, or LTA. The other 2 options are transportation impact analysis. What we've described as non-CEQA would be for those projects which do not require CEQA analysis, but the determination is made that the general plan level of service consistency analysis would be conducted. And for larger projects, this could also include the Marin County Congestion Management Plan LOS consistency analysis, which is a separate consistency evaluation. And then finally, there are the largest projects which would require a transportation impact analysis. It would include all of the above plus CEQA review. So those are terms we'll be talking about in the coming slides. So this slide indicates that the way in which we'll determine which of those studies, the first step in determining which of those studies would be needed would be a trip generation screening. This would inform the scale of study that would need to be done. This really builds on the current trip-based screening that the city has, which calls for a formal traffic impact study to be completed when more than 1,000 daily trips are generated, or 100 peak hour trips. But most projects are smaller than that, and they fall into what we've identified as tier 1 or tier 2. Tier 1 is those projects that are less than 110 daily trips, generate less than 110 daily trips. And this is what's been characterized as a small project. It's actually identified in state code, in CEQA. And for these very small projects, where you would be looking at roughly 10 or 12 trips an hour, 1 trip every 5 to 6 minutes, if you will, usually that would be handled through a staff level review of the site plan and the compatibility of the network. Once you jump above that trip level, you're into what we've identified as tier 2, which is anywhere from 110 to 1,000 daily trips. And we've further broken that up into a tier 2A and tier 2B. So for the smaller local traffic assessment that I talked about earlier, that would really be for projects in tier 2A, typically 100 to 250 daily trips. And so that's a very small fraction of that tier 2 area. Most of the projects that fall into tier 2 will require a transportation impact assessment. And then certainly anything over 1,000 daily trips or 100 peak hour trips would require the full TIA, a CEQA review in some cases, and would require the Marin County CMP compliance. That 100 trip threshold is the Marin County CMP compliance threshold. Next slide. So this is a scoping chart that may be a little daunting at first, but it's intended to be a chart that allows you to walk through and make a quick determination of what level of evaluation your project requires, and it also combines that with initial DMT screening. So the green boxes are questions that you would ask. Depending upon whether you answer it yes or no, you would follow the green line if you answered it yes, the yellow line if you answered it no. These eventually lead to a yellow box. There's 5 yellow boxes in the chart, and those yellow boxes are the scoping determination. So that'll tell you whether you require or not, whether you do or don't require a study. If you do, what type of study and how that would be connected, in most cases, to the CEQA type of evaluation that need to be done. This is not sort of foolproof. There might be a few situations where you might find unique projects that don't follow strictly through this, but we think this would apply to a very large majority of projects and allow for staff and applicants to understand what the requirements are in terms of doing a transportation study. Next slide, please. This next chart is really around the key elements of a transportation study and defining what those are. So it gets to the issue of method and the steps that you would take. And there are 5 key steps highlighted here. And then within each of the steps, there's a little bit more detail. Starts with defining the scope and what steps would be required to define the scope. Moves on to how to evaluate existing conditions. Then how to, step 3 is looking at conditions without the project. So background, and in the case of larger projects, cumulative conditions without the project. Step 4 is around looking at the project's vehicle travel demand and infrastructure changes. So understanding the influence of the project and the effects of the project itself. And then step 5 is adding those project trips into the network and understanding both project trips and project VMT to understand the project's contribution to effects or impacts. So those are kind of the key 5 steps in terms of the methodology. The next few slides are around thresholds. So the first highlights, provides a high-level overview of the CEQA thresholds. We've talked about the VMT assessment. In a minute, I'll walk through a little bit more of what that looks like in the guidelines. But then in addition to the VMT assessment, there will also be an evaluation of effects on the roadway system, on the transit system, and on the bicycle and pedestrian system. These are all evaluations that are currently done, and so they will be retained and evaluated for any projects that require a CEQA evaluation. And then the last 2 slides are around the VMT screening and the VMT thresholds. So the state's Governor's Office of Planning and Research, or OPR, identified 6 categories for screening projects. And the intent here is to be able to quickly identify projects that are low VMT generator so that you can identify without doing a quantitative evaluation. And so for certain cases, based either on the land use or the location of a project, there is enough historical information to allow you to conclude, based on a qualitative assessment of a project, that a project would be presumed to have a less significant effect on VMT, and that project would not be required to go through a detailed analysis. This includes projects within transit priority areas, and I will say that's not only that's not just a project within a half-mile watershed of smart stations, but there are other criteria around minimum densities and parking and other items that you would have to take a look at. Affordable housing, 100% affordable housing and infill locations, small projects that we talked about earlier. And then there's a couple of categories, one locally serving public facilities, and this is similar to the neighborhood serving retail project category. And these are projects that would go into a neighborhood or into a part of the community where they would provide a more walkable option or a more bikeable option, or an option that has a shorter trip length and therefore could be presumed to have a low VMT generating type project. So it would be adding, for instance, a neighborhood school in an area that doesn't have a school, and families have to travel a farther distance to get to schools. And so that shortens their distance and therefore reduces their VMT. For retail, similarly, if you were to put a grocery in an area that didn't have grocery or food options, that would then make for shorter trips for the residents living in that area. And so those projects would fall under these 2 categories. And then lastly, projects that are in areas that are low VMT zones, and these we have mapped out based on the TAM model, could also be screened out. So this last slide is the VMT thresholds that were approved by the council last July. The only thing we have added to this slide is the numeric values for the residential and office under current level and impact threshold of 13.4 VMT per capita is the current value from residential on average across the city based on the TAM model, and the threshold is 15% below that 13.4, so that would bring you to the 11.4. And similarly, the office is 16.9 and 14.35 are values for home-based work VMT per employee, and the 15% below that threshold. So these were all adopted by the council last July with a provision to come back with a report to the council within, I believe, 2 to 3 years to provide an update, and then a decision could be made whether or not these needed to be updated. But these are largely consistent, in fact, very consistent with OPR guidance in terms of identifying thresholds for these types of land use types. And that wraps up the presentation.
Great. Yeah, I'll just add the next steps for the TIA guidelines. As Paul mentioned, we'll be meeting with Responsible Growth and Marin to walk through their comments with them, and we'll be revising the guidelines and bringing them back to you with General Plan 2040.
Great, thank you. And there's the website right there. So let's do this. There we go. Stops. That was a lot of information. We'll take a moment. So I'll go through and call on the individual council members to see if there are questions, and I'm sure there might be some more that come up. If not tonight, then after tonight. So I will start with Vice Mayor Bushy.
Well, first of all, I have to thank you for the wonderful report. Of course, I've been with this all the way through. So it's been a long road, but it's really nice to see it coming into the final stages. I remain satisfied that we did the right thing with the vehicle miles traveled issue and retaining some of the level of service analysis. So we'll have something to compare over the first years as we sort of transition from one system to the other. We can use both yardsticks for a while to measure and compare. And as complicated as it looks, and it does seem very complicated, I think everything is on the flow chart here. So great work. I'm looking forward to getting this thing completely across the line. Thanks.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, and thank you for representing the council on those meetings over the last couple of years. So Councilmember Kurtz, do you have any questions for the team?
Thank you, yes. Really appreciate the report, sort of digging into all the details coming in at this point. I'm assuming the TIA guidelines are new, that there were not other guidelines prior. Okay, so I'm getting head nods on that one. So appreciate always having guidelines, being a project manager. That's we love those. We love process flows. The goal being to simplify, ideally, reduce the subjectivity. And I'm wondering if, thank you again. Also, I just want to comment of meeting with RGM, the message that they have provided and their technical details. It's going to be good to have all the technical people around the table having that conversation. So I appreciate taking the time to do that. In terms of, has this been the guidelines we wanted in practice? At the end of the day, it has to be in practice with the staff and with the developers. And so has it been vetted yet in practice against either a past project to run it through? So how would the staff use it? And I think it might be helpful just to see if it's really a workable guideline. Does that flow work? Is there a checklist? Can it be automated? Because it'd be interesting to see, even taking an older project, to see if it works, and to see because the staff and the developers are the ones who are going to be using it on a day-to-day basis. And so it looks good on paper, but it comes down to in practice. So I would just ask to see if that could be done as part of this process as well.
Good evening.
Yes.
Rafat Ray, City Traffic Engineer. Thank you. I just want to respond to Councilmember Reports with has it been vetted? I want to make the point that many of the complicated processes that we have in this document has been followed. We've been doing the trip generation to distribution. The only difference here is the injection of VMT. The process is not new to anyone. We went through an a lot of effort to make this document as friendly as it could be for developers so they know what to expect going into the process. It's written for traffic engineers doing the traffic transportation assessment. However, the flow chart has been dictated, most of the flow chart steps has been dictated by the Office of Planning and Research, the state office. So I think many of the steps will be understood by the professionals that are in that circle, and the only thing that is kind of new to everyone is the VMT and the metric of the VMT.
Great, thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Deputy Director Ray, for that clarification. That's really helpful. Additional questions? Councilmember Kurtz? No. Okay, so I'll go to Councilmember Hill.
Thank you, Mayor Kate. So first, I just want to call out Barry Miller's incredible work here. I think you've orchestrated a very robust, intentional process, both in word and by deed. I think you've done an amazing job in engaging this community to even result in the opus that sits before us. So thank you, Barry, for orchestrating, working with staff, Opticos, fair and peers. There's so many people, as well as the steering committee. I think our community is well served. So now I have a lot of questions. There's a lot, there's so many pages here, and both positively and with regret, I've read every single word to date, which is really great. So really only 2 questions for you, Barry, and then I actually have 4 questions on the TIA guidelines. I saw in one of the comments from Sustainable San Rafael, Bill Carney, he does call out, is mitigation of GHG really unavoidable? And I'd just love to take in your characterization, how you think about that, because I think you started to touch on it at a high level earlier on around how we define, unavoidable versus avoidable in an EIR for something of a document like this. So maybe you can elaborate further, because I would just love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. And Paul may want to chime in on this as well. And I'll say first that there is a team of air quality scientists that works on the EIR at the EIR consulting firm that is responding to that question in a technical way that's way beyond my capacity. But I'll say that in my experience working on EIRs, GHG is often determined to be significant and unavoidable because we don't know that the actions taken by the city of San Rafael are going to get us to the 80% reduction by 2050 that the state is striving for. And we also can't control the global release of GHG, so we can only do what we can do as an individual city. So often they'll find with something that's that global and that broad in its impact, that no matter what we do, we will never be sure that we will mitigate to a less than significant impact. And so we have to assume that it will be significant and unavoidable, and then make appropriate mitigation measures to deal with that. So that's part of the process as well, as it provides that additional impetus for stronger mitigation, which I think was a good point made by Sustainable San Rafael in their letter, that we may want to make some of these recommendations stronger if indeed we have a significant unavoidable impact at the end.
Thank you. And I take your comments in the spirit that they're made, which is that I think that in our hearts, I think we all want to make sure that we're reducing GHG, but just in terms of terminology, I think that I think that's where the contrast is, if I can say it that way. With respect to the diversity, equity, inclusion element, I know that back in November, I had made comments about expanding dimensions of what we mean by that to include, and I know even building on what Mayor Kate had said earlier, in the portion on the agenda around the Library Week proclamation, you know, she mentioned several things around sexual orientation, gender identity. I think we could also just I think even calling them out by name, I think would be really helpful because they don't exist right now. I think they reflect our vision and our values. I know that you had taken that in. They haven't been incorporated yet, but I know that you were going to work on that. But I just wanted to call that out. No questions, but I know that that's in process. Unless you wanted to characterize it a little bit, but I know that it's not a trivial thing to update that section. So looking forward to that. The TIA guidance, and I had several questions, but I know we're time limited. I'll just move to the enforcement of TDM. I thought it was great that you know, we can hold you know, each project to the conditions, but I was wondering, and I think this is for Bob. As far as enforcement, like let's say we get an agreement on some of the conditions for TDM, what is the teeth if they don't follow through on things that they have agreed to on those mitigations? And I guess maybe it's explicitly somewhere else, but I couldn't find it in the document on how we enforce someone following through on all those conditions.
I'm not sure if that's, if maybe Paul or Rafat might want to weigh in on this question. We don't have anything in the document that specifies how enforcement is going to be done, but it is a, it is an element. It gets to how, as you're doing a CEQA document, you write the mitigation measure and the determination you make about whether an individual project is going to result in an impact that's then less than significant. So generally speaking, you have options of how you want to write the mitigation and the level of monitoring that you want to include. I think what we've talked about with staff is wanting to have some kind of programmatic approach to it, so that you know, where that might potentially involve collaborating with either multiple projects or even multiple jurisdictions in the way that projects are monitored, because that is a significant issue in terms of requiring staff resources. But as you prepare the CEQA document, it's into the issue of how much detail you want to go into for an individual project on monitoring, and that gets, I think ideally you have some kind of programmatic approach to addressing that that can apply to multiple projects. There are jurisdictions that are now sort of starting to work through this issue that are charging a small fee for doing the monitoring, and that becomes a kind of an ongoing process. But not every project is going to require, not every project is going to have a VMT effect, or is going to require that you have a mitigation measure that is tied to monitoring. In general, it's going to more likely be the larger employment-based projects that are going to have that requirement, because the finding that and you'll hear about this as you review the CEQA document for the general plan, is that housing projects we found as a whole had a less significant effect on VMT, and therefore would not be requiring VMT mitigations. But the employment projects, because of the long trip distance for employees that many of which have to travel from outside Marin County to jobs in San Rafael, that's what's driving a lot of the VMT effects and the mitigation. So those are going to generally be applied to sort of larger employers.
Yes. Yeah, Director Jensen, you want to add on to that?
I'd love to comment on this, because I have to say, this is probably the toughest part of transitioning to VMT, and that is the follow through on enforcement. And we've been tracking what some of the bigger cities have been doing, like San Francisco and San Jose, when they condition a project that's required to implement a TDM program, a transportation systems management program or demand management program, there usually is a touch point like an annual review. And as Bob Grandy mentioned, there's a charge to the applicant. So this has staffing implications. It has tracking implications. And having gone through this 30 years ago, when we used to condition projects with TDM back when you can use that as a mitigation measure, there has to be follow through or it will fall through the cracks. And so we've even had discussions, and Rafat, I think we maybe want to make a few comments on this with TAM as the regional planning agency that may have the tools to do that enforcement for all of the agencies in the county, because all of us are going to have to essentially enforce the VMT if there's a requirement for some sort of a ongoing transportation system management program. So like I said, it has staffing implications. It does require a very strict programmatic approach to setting up touch points annually with a lot of these projects. So Rafat, did you have anything to add to that?
I would love to. Thank you for the opportunity. The answer, the direct question to Councilmember Hill is that it really depends on the TDM measure and the size of the project. And the bottom line is, what does it mean to San Rafael? In order to, we're not going to go to the extreme to hiring a TDM coordinator to check and have annual reports from every developer. So BioMarin, for example, is a traffic generator that we could probably get to a negotiation point where they need to pay attention and coordinate their TDM measures. For example, a development, 60 apartments on 2nd Street, for example, in the precise plan area, the TDM will be towards maybe parking numbers, towards parking numbers, and then improving either pedestrians or pedestrian mode or transit mode. So typical TDM requirement for a small apartment building is to, or condominiums, is to say you'll subsidize the transit passes for your residents for the first 3 years. And this way people get hooked on transit, and that's a TDM that we don't need to monitor after the 3 years, because whoever's going to find that mode convenience will continue to do that mode. So it really depends on the mode, and it really depends on the size of the project. And like Paul mentioned, this is a regional issue that we probably have to take on at a later time.
And if I could add one last thing, and that is that I would think of housing in the downtown as a VMT mitigation measure. Because what we found is we've added housing, and you went from a no project scenario in the future to the general plan level of housing, it drove the VMT down. So housing in and of itself, and we found it to be a low generator in the downtown. So not only is it a low generator, but it helps to reduce VMT, citywide VMT. So one last quick note.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill, please do ask questions. I mean, this is the general plan is obviously a big project, and these guidelines are important, and it's the first time this council has actually had it. So please do, no need to restrain. I think the community likes to hear your questions as well. So if you have additional ones. Oh, he's switching over.
You're on mute.
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm just transitioning to a different device. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I appreciate all the comments here. I think the auditability of developers and areas following through on agreements, like even just the transit fare subsidy. I was trying to tabletop that in my mind, and it would be so hard. And Rafat, I appreciated your comments about, practicability in terms of how do we do measured approach to that. I have several other questions, but I'll ask at least just one more. And I think it was touched on, looking at San Francisco and San Jose, you mentioned Director Jensen, and I even looked at Oakland. I didn't find anything as robust and detailed as this TIA guidance. I was quite impressed, actually, at the level of detail in this one. Do we find that this level of detail is found in other municipalities of our size? This seems extremely prescriptive. I think appropriately prescriptive, but I was surprised not to find this level of prescription in other municipalities.
San Francisco does have, it may be hard to find it, but San Francisco has a very comprehensive set of TIA guidelines. I would say this is probably among the more comprehensive based on, for this city the size of San Rafael, that is out there. Many cities have not gone to this level of detail yet, but there are some I know that are in the process. But I would say San Francisco, Oakland, and San Jose would be the three cities in the Bay Area that have guidelines developed. And actually San Jose is looking at updating their guidelines and their TDM ordinances. They're having some issues with how they're implementing it. So we know they're in the process of updating, particularly their TDM ordinance.
Thank you.
I do have something to add, Councilmember Hill. City of Santa Rosa, City of Petaluma, they both have adopted guidelines, or I don't know if they're both adopted, but we had an opportunity to review those while we were crafting ours. And they're Santa Rosa is a larger city, obviously, but Petaluma is pretty much comparable. But they're comparable in terms of their being covering the same level of detail. So, and those communities have chosen to retain level of service as well as part of the mix. So that's why we were particularly interested in looking at them.
Thank you. And this is more of a question for Rafat. Thank you for joining in the meeting today. Are we able to take advantage of any of the new traffic signaling infrastructure to help do some of the measurements? I know that among other things, beyond the SCADA network being improved in terms of how we speak, so to speak, with the traffic signaling, I know that cameras are in place. Can we use any of that for, the measurement of passengers per vehicle and other things to actually do more real-time and automated measurement of traffic and occupancy?
Thanks for asking this question. Do you have an hour so I can talk about this topic?
There's no simple answer.
There is a simple answer. The simple answer is yes, definitely. And you will see actually a number of pedestrians downtown with the closure of 4 streets for dining under the lights. And it shows an incredible, I think the number, last time we checked, the number of pedestrians downtown tripled with the dining under the stars. And that's coming to the city council actually in a memo. We just found out about it last week. Actually, we're working with the vendor, but definitely the ability to collect multimodal counts in the downtown, including classification, is a tremendous tool, and we haven't tapped the full potential of it yet.
Great. Thank you for the abbreviated answer. One more question, and that is, there's a section around the stakeholders involved in screening. What I noticed is that it said community development, public works, and or consultant. My concern with that language is that I actually counted 6 permutations of different groups of stakeholders that would have to make those screening decisions. And while I think staff enjoy a very wonderful working relationship, I think anytime I see something like that, I just want to make sure that there's clarity in terms of how we arrive at a decision on screening criteria. There could be divergent opinion. Do we, I could imagine something like we go with the most the highest tier among those three bodies that come up with the difference of opinion. Anyway, hopefully there's never controversy when I see language like that. I just wanted to see if there's any comments on how we might resolve it among three different stakeholders.
Yeah, just a quick note, the and/or consultant really was intended to apply in probably very rare occasions when you have a very large project and the staff might bring on a consultant to assist staff with that very large project. But I think it would still be, the decisions would primarily come, well, they would come from Public Works and Community Development, and the consultant would just support that effort on large projects. I don't think you'd see a consultant involved in direct consulting. And Paul is shaking his head. So,
okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me take this time to review it. Appreciate it.
Excellent questions, Councilmember Hill. Thank you. Councilmember Scolari.
Hi, and thank you so much for the report. And I really enjoyed reading it, and I think it is so well done and so graphic, so much information, but it's so well presented. I think the way that you also have it on the website makes it extremely easy. So, so thank you so much for that. I have two main questions. The first one is around the industrial categories and specifically the light industrial office. And this is around land use. So I'm thinking it is so hard right now, and I still remember when I think Director Jensen, you were working on the plan 2020 a while ago. I can't remember if it was you, but I still remember the plan 2020 when it was crafted, and now we are talking about 2040 with our crystal ball and trying to figure out what it's going to look like. And we started preparing this before the pandemic, and so many things are changing in the last year, like how people might not go back to work like they did in the past. So I'm thinking about being flexible, and where there are many things that we don't know what's going to happen. So when I'm looking at the light industrial and office, it says in there that residential uses are generally not permitted in these areas, so a density standard is not included. And I guess my question is around, well, you mentioned like some areas could be like Lindaro Street and Jordan Road area. That's for, you know, we have like Equator over there, right? So what if there will be in the future desire to have employees housing there? Is it possible to have flexibility in the description? So in 10 years, we realize that maybe, you know, we want to have people closer to where they work. So that's my question around, especially around light industrial. I understand the general industrial might be more complicated, but still, you know, I can see certain areas in San Rafael that maybe will benefit from some mixed uses.
Well, I can comment on that. And I think I think the light industrial office is a very good example on something like this that we're going to have to monitor over time, because right now the draft general plan does not make any recommendations to allow for residential use in the light industrial and office land use designation. We allow that in office and commercial, but not the light industrial and office. If there are changes as we move forward, let's say in 5 years, we revisit our general plan and we want to introduce that land use into those areas, a residential land use, or let's say we do a specific plan for the Southeast San Rafael and Canal area and we decide we want to change some of those areas to allow for housing, then we would have to go back and revisit these guidelines and the thresholds to see where we need to make some adjustments. So they kind of go hand in hand with that first decision point on whether or not you want to change the land use allowances in those areas. But that's something we'll have to monitor over time. And I think your point's well taken with the pandemic. I mean, there's a lot of things that we're just going to have to monitor, expecting that there likely will be some changes to the way people live or work that will warrant adjustments in our general plan update. So I don't know if that helps you in your question, but this will be ongoing.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess my question would be like the likability, like how easy it will be like to review this in 5 years, and because I know making a new general plan is a lot of work and everybody's involved into this. I'm not sure what's going to be the process in 5 years, and if you need to start making changes, it's easier to make it now when it's still, when it hasn't been finalized versus doing it in 5 years. I also know that you did not include the density standard, and I'm not sure how hard it is to include that. So I guess my question is also like around timing. Would it be like pretty much impossible to do it in 5 years versus maybe taking maybe changing a little bit the wording that we can add some flexibility now that will save us some work in the future?
And Barry, do you have any comments on this, since you deal with living general plans and revisiting them every year or every 5 years or whatever that might help?
Yeah, you certainly don't have to wait 20 years to do another general plan update, and you don't have to do a complete update of the plan to address this issue. I did want to say this was one of the big issues that the General Plan Steering Committee wrestled with, although we wrestled with it before the pandemic. And so the issue has become, it's different today than it was then. And we're seeing light industrial property owners start to think about repurposing their properties for residential. I would say at this point, that would need to be part of the PDA planning process that's going to happen in the future, maybe even through the housing element that's going to happen in the next 2 years. We start to look at specific light industrial sites that could be repurposed. I would hesitate to do it for the whole light industrial office area, because once you open that door, it's very hard to close it. And you'll find a lot of demand and a lot of those revenue generating, job generating uses under pressure to flip to residential, which puts pressure on the neighboring uses for them. So you want to be more strategic and selective in how you do something like that. So I would say this is going to be an ongoing issue that gets addressed annually through long-range planning and through current planning applications as well. If we find in 2 or 3 years, you know what, this policy isn't working, we can either make changes to the map to redesignate areas or changes to the definition and the zoning to open the door a little bit, but we want to be really careful in how we do that and really intentional.
Okay, thank you for that answer. And my second question, I guess is like a half question, half comment. When I'm thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion as part of the plan, that I'm so happy we have that in there. And I completely agree with Councilmember Hill about just naming certain things that I think they need to be named. But when I look at the general plan, I also like to look at it with like an equity lens. For instance, when we are talking about sustainability, and I'm all about sustainability, but when we are talking about like increasing like the percentage of the electric cars and or EV chargers, and I'm thinking about the diversity of our community, I think we really have to think about equity and what that means for certain communities, because in reality, our lowest income community is going to be extremely hard for them to go into electric cars and EV chargers. So how can we apply that equity which comes into funding to make sure that they will be able to go there? Because we definitely want to, reduce our carbon footprint and be more sustainable, and how we can do that from an equitable point of view especially when we are establishing some mandates. So
yeah, it's an excellent question. I don't think we have an answer right now, but it's definitely that's the kind of point we want to raise in this element and begin to think about that and think about what the solutions are. And you mentioned funding, and that is, I think the key is how can we support funding for those kinds of programs and other kinds of tax benefits or whatever it is that need to happen to make it more viable for the whole population, and not just those who can afford it. So I mean, those are the kinds of issues that we're trying to elevate in this element, so that we can begin to address them and work on them over time.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I really, again, appreciate your work. It's excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I concur with what my colleagues have said. The amount of work that has gone into this by everyone on the screen, as well as the steering committee and the community members that have taken the time to call in and give input. And just to underscore, this process is still ongoing, that there's lots of room for people to comment still in the Planning Commission, as well as when it comes back to the council. My only question actually follows on what Councilmember Lorenz Gulati was just talking about, and it has to do with equity. So what I was hearing in the beginning of the presentation was a lot about the historical resources, and it was very obvious that there was a group that was very adept at engaging with the city and talking about that important issue, which we do need to talk about. But it made me think about, if you're not as adept, or if you don't know how to advocate, how are those voices being heard? So in the outreach, Barry, maybe you can answer to, how do we reach beyond the people that know how to get to City Hall? And luckily we have great tools like this, like Zoom, and we know that Councilmember Micah recently had a town hall in Spanish. I mean, we have a lot of people that we want to get everyone's input to have it really reflect our diverse community. So if you could speak to that.
I can speak to the experience we had with the general plan, which is to really promote partnerships with the organizations that are connected with those communities. The Canal Alliance in particular, incredible shout out to all the work that they've done with us on the general plan update. The direct input that they received from the community. We found that workshops that were bilingual weren't really working, so we retained somebody to do one-on-one interviews with the community through the Canal Alliance, and that was a really effective way to get input we just weren't getting otherwise. And we're going to need to continue those kinds of partnerships with other organizations in the city to reach communities. And I think we need to learn ourselves what the best ways are. We're all learning through this process of how to do this in the most effective way, and still working on it.
And that's a great answer. I think the community, going through the community-based organization makes sense, because we can't assume like, oh, it just works for this group of people, it's going to work for everybody else. I mean, that's a very traditional way we used to look at things. And now I think the one-on-one, if it is a series of one-on-one, maybe, that's a great place to start. So, so thank you for that. And I know, again, the community will have plenty of time to still weigh in before anything's finalized. So I will ask the city clerk to come online, to come on screen, and I will open the public comment to our community on this item.
Thanks, Mayor Kate. To comment on Zoom, please use the raise hand feature. And if you're calling in, please press *9. And if you're submitting comments on YouTube, please go ahead and introduce yourself, write public comment in advance, and submit your comments in groups. We do have a good amount of public comments. I'm going to use my timer, so when there's 10 seconds left, I'll hold that up. I will say that it looks like the majority of callers are calling in by telephone, so they won't see the notification. Mayor Kate, just a heads up.
Okay, thank you.
Hi again, this is Bill Carney. So Sustainable San Rafael has followed the general plan and downtown plan for a few years now, and we want to express our great appreciation to Barry Miller and staff and their team for creating an outstanding blueprint for the next 20 years. And also, we want to express our dismay that the environmental documents for this effort come to the incredibly unsustainable finding that greenhouse gases cannot be mitigated by 2040. We know better in San Rafael, and we can do better. We know how to reduce greenhouse gases to the level the DEIR specifies, and in the time frame that we must achieve. So the D in this document stands for draft, and we ask that you ask the consultants to come back with a mitigated final EIR that shows just how the city meets its own greenhouse gas goals. To that end, we've offered a few suggestions in writing that we hope will be helpful. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Carney.
Hello, this is Shirley Fisher. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, Shirley.
Excellent. Hi, I'm speaking for Responsible Growth Marin, and I just want to say that we are very, very pleased to hear that the staff will be meeting with us to go over the comments and questions that we've raised regarding the traffic impact analysis guidelines. There's a great precedent for this because in January 2020, our group met with city staff and the consultants to go over the proposed standards for VMT and LOS for the inclusion in the mobility element of the general plan. And it was actually out of that meeting that the suggestion for the creating of these guidelines came to be. So we think this is a very useful way to work on a small scale to deal with some of these issues. I just want to call attention to a couple of the issues, particularly where we find that there is confusion. One is the maps regarding the low VMT areas. Another is the guidelines seem to say that intersections and road segments that are operating better than the city's urban standard of LOSD won't need any traffic impact studies until they get bad enough to be LOSD. So I don't think this is actually the intent of what the mobility element has. I think these are some of the things that we will be very happy to work with city staff and the consultants to sort of see if we can iron some of these things out and make sure the intent of the mobility element and the standards that were put up are met. So again, thank you for the opportunity to meet with the staff, and we look forward to moving forward on developing these guidelines that certainly are very comprehensive, very complete, and we'd love to see the flow chart. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Shirley.
Hi, this is Kate Powers, and I'm representing Marine Conservation League this evening. I wanted to reiterate everyone's appreciation of the process. I have appreciated the many opportunities for the public to comment on the plan. And I just wanted to draw attention to the staff report mentions MCL's comments on the land use element that have been also endorsed by Marin Sierra Club. And one of the key comments is the importance of integrating environmental planning with the land use planning and the mobility planning elements as an objective early in the planning process. Traditionally, environmental planning is often framed in terms of mitigating and against impacts. But if you integrate environmental planning early on, the projects become more context sensitive, and it's easier to grow in a sustainable way that impacts the livability for people in their communities. The other comment I wanted to make is that MCL agrees with Marin Audubon Society that San Rafael should include a Baylands corridor similar to that of the Marin Countywide Plan, which would be related to undeveloped lands that are historic baylands that currently may be tidal marsh, diked historic baylands, or adjacent uplands, because these could provide potential sites for future restoration, flood control benefits, and enable flexibility to adapt to sea level rise impacts. And that would close the gap of the Baylands corridor that currently includes major sections in North Marin and South Marin. And finally, I just wanted to say that we also support adding more protection for trees, both native trees, stands of trees, and having a tree-lined, safe, comfortable, walkable street is a great way to combat climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.
We do have one comment submitted through YouTube. This is from Pam Reeves. We at RGM appreciate that we will be meeting with staff to complete the document. Centerfell is a front runner in tackling VMT guidelines. And that concludes public comment.
Thank you. I will close public comments. I heard primarily comments. I didn't hear any questions in there, but Director Jensen or Mr. Miller, do let me know if I misheard. No, okay. So with that, I will bring it back to the council members for either final questions or comments. And then after we've heard from everyone, then we'll have a motion. So I'll start with you, Vice Mayor Bushy. And again, thank you for your representation on the steering committee.
And I had left out thanking the leaders of our steering committee. Stephanie Platt and Omar Carrera, who just did a fantastic job. You can imagine corralling all these issues and all the different people for 3 years to get us to where we are, even though we had great leaders like Barry and Paul. I have no questions. I look forward to the remainder of the public process. And for tonight, I'm prepared to move to accept the report when the time is right.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Kurtz.
No additional question, just would also like to thank, it's great to see the development of the reports forming together over the last couple of years. I remember going to one of the very first meetings and thinking, how is this ever going to come together? And it's fantastic to see it where it's at now and the level of questions and community participation. So looking forward to approving this report.
Thank you. Councilmember Urens-Gulati.
Yes, no questions either, and I reiterate what all the other council members are saying. It's great work. I have participated on a few meetings, and it is just great to see so many great leaders in our community, trying to guess what's going to look like, 40 years from now. So again, really thank you everybody, and especially our staff for the report.
Thank you. Councilmember Hill.
Yes, everything that's been said by my colleagues, and just two things. These are not questions, but comments that I wasn't able to integrate into my earlier comments, which is, and Barry, I know we made these comments from the Planning Commission, but that wayfinding graphic to be able to say how all of the documents interrelate, general plan to the climate change action plan, the downtown precise plan, and the bicycle and pedestrian plan, how they all hang with each other. I think it would be an incredibly informative single-page graphic to orient the layperson. And then finally, just to add to the naming of identities, I think it's also appropriate to include neurodiversity, disability, and mental health conditions. I think that really deserves destigmatization, and I think is going to expand our inclusion values. So I would just leave it with that, but I am looking forward to approving this report. Thank you.
Thank you. And I concur with all the comments that have been made. And again, and the big heaps of praise. This is a really important document for our community. This is the guidelines, the framework, the nexus, whatever you want to call it, for as we look at future development. So I'm delighted that we've gotten the input. And Barry, thank you for really bringing the community along. We had new elements that we are looking at this year. So continuing to get this information is really key. And appreciate all the input that the council gave tonight, as well as the people that called in. So stay tuned. I hope people keep contacting, keep staying involved. And if you could just say, Barry, I can't remember the name of the website, just one more time. We could put it in the chat, but if you just say it for anyone watching would be great.
It's sanrafael2040.org.
Okay. sanrafael2040.org. You can also find it by going to San Rafael, our City of San Rafael website, and putting in general plan. I think it pops up. So with that, I think Vice Mayor, had you made a motion in support of accepting this report?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. City Clerk, do you want us to read the agenda item, or is that?
Accept report is sufficient. Would you like me to do roll call?
Okay. Yes, roll call, please.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Bushy?
Aye.
Councilmember Hill?
Aye.
Councilmember Kurtz?
Aye.
Councilmember Urens-Gulati?
Aye.
Mayor Kate?
Aye. That motion carries 5-0, accepting the report. Thank you all. That agenda item is concluded. So thank you. We don't have any San Rafael successor agency, and I know we might have, I am going to, before I adjourn this meeting, I'm going to read something. We are adjourning the meeting in honor of Jimmy Garrity this evening. He's also known to his friends as #JimmyJustice. I met Jimmy in 2013, and I know firsthand that our city is better for him having been here. And we are deeply saddened at his recent passing. He was a strong advocate for the environment and for social justice. Jimmy showed up. He showed up for the bike community. He participated on the city's bike ped committee for years, and you could see him jetting around our downtown on his bike. He showed up for the environment. He was part of Sustainable San Rafael for over a decade. He showed up for democracy. He was part of the Community Media Center of Marin since its inception. And he showed up whenever there was injustice, and he brought all 6'5" of himself to the moment. I know I'm not alone, and that I will miss his passion, compassion, and fearlessness that he freely gave to our community. So in honor of Jimmy Garrity, tonight's meeting is adjourned. Take care, everyone.